how many Pakistanis should be raped to avoid one white British person being raped?
Can I ask you, why do you think a parent has a moral right to kill a child?
Because I think that it raises utility, and because a child cannot fear, and because a fetus cannot fear, I cannot regard them being killed as bad.
And there's also a moral wrong.
No, there is not. There is no thing that is morally wrong or right in and of itself. And if you wish to make that claim, then you might as well just say that it is my intuition that every particular thing that I wish to believe is true, and I could have no counter argument against that. I think that you are a thinking and reasoning being, rather than that.
What's the age that you think killing is bad?
I think about 1 to 1.5 would be reasonable.
Nicholas.
Yeah.
Hey man, how long have you been here? Sorry about that.
About 10 minutes.
Oh, sorry, dude. Sorry. I was doing a quick bookshelf tour. Nicholas, you should share the link to your followers as well so that they can join.
All right.
Hang on. I'll get up your Twitter so that we can have some very interesting discourse. Thanks for joining, by the way.
I can quote tweet it.
Yeah, that'd be good. Hang on.
I was just tweeting about teacher performance evaluations.
So, are you doing like tutoring then?
No.
No, you're not. You're not at that stage of your university career. You're doing a PhD now.
Yeah, I'm doing a PhD now.
Oh, cool. What year are you into your PhD?
2 years.
Oh, cool. And you're like 24, 25?
24. And I'll turn 25 in October.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. I think we're like the same age. I'm like 1 year older than you probably. I'm 99. What about you?
2000.
2000. Okay, yeah. All right. I'm getting up your Twitter and I'm gonna put it on the screen while we can talk. And I'll just like I'll literally quiz you about some of your like recent controversial pronouncements, and it'll just be interesting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hit me.
And I know you went on Hanani's podcast, which is really good as well. I'm gonna say straight up, I disavow Nicholas's calls for assassination. I want to still be able to visit America. I disavow, but yeah, we'll get into it and you can talk about it, Nicholas.
Okay.
Have you? Yes. Share the link. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Hang on. I'll quickly post that we're together, and then I'll put it up. Nicholas. It's great to have Nicholas Decker here. Very controversial young thinker. You've been blowing up on Substack. Part of that is like you've made some very controversial pronouncements in recent weeks and months. And we'll discuss this. I've had a lot of people in my stream going like, get Nicholas on, and I was like, yeah, okay. Live stream with Nicholas. I'm just going to quickly post the link to my Discord and my Twitter as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I'll start going through and like actually asking you questions about.
I think that's a fairly good format, I'd say.
Yeah.
You'll note that my last tweets have largely been going over trade theory papers, because I'm making a sort of like lecture. I made a reading list for the bright and ambitious undergraduate student, which I highly suggest that you read through. I think you could read through it in a month of fast reading. But it was just like making a series of tweet threads that serve as sort of like lecture notes or just commentary, not really replacing it. I don't think that you can understand the essence, but I generally find it very helpful to have like a plain language intuition for a lot of papers. It really does make understanding the math easier if you understand where it's going. And in some cases, the paper already does give that intuition pretty well. So I'll just comment on other things. But yes.
Hang on, I'm just quickly sending it to my Discord to get everyone on as well. Cool. Okay, it's interesting. I was talking about is India, Pakistan for 2 hours, and then I got you saying that you would come on, which is cool. And then while we were waiting, I was just doing a quick bookshelf tour. Okay. I saw. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we'll go through your tweets. Okay, so Nicholas Decker. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, Nicholas, just quickly for people on Twitter, you will need no introduction because you've been blowing up on Twitter. I mean, how many views did you get in the last month when you made that that post about Trump? Like, how many?
I don't know, but it's in the tens of millions at this point.
Yeah.
I haven't. You know what? I can actually look up the stats now out of
Why not?
some
It'd be interesting.
curiosity.
I've got a comment by hey, I actually have the book by Calvino, If on a Winter Night, A Traveler. I do have that. I actually want to read that. Tell us your stats. I'm interested.
How do you find that?
Should be in your, if you click like the big X premium, you got premium, do you?
Yes.
So if you click on premium,
I see. Analytics, got it.
And then go to analytics.
It's been over the. I assume this is the past. Oh, that's the past 7 days. So I'll go back 4 weeks. It was 33.7 million impressions.
Damn.
And there were 33,500 replies.
Fucking hell,
which is
yeah.
up 3,000%.
Yeah, gee. And okay, and with your posts, I'll let you discuss it because I as a non-US citizen who lives overseas, like if I say anything about it, I'm literally gonna get banned from traveling to the United States. So you can discuss it and just tell people what you were saying and why it became so controversial.
Well, I think that this present administration is a malignant evil and is one of the more profound threats to American democracy that we have ever faced. And I think that we have perhaps an overly naive view of the nature of political power, and that ultimately political power derives from the ability to exert force.
So you essentially was calling for force against the Trump administration.
No,
and again,
I'm saying that may be necessary in the future.
Yeah. So you said it may be necessary in the future. And look, I have to say, I personally disavow. I still want to be able to travel to the United States. I'm a non-violent person and everything. I thought it was I thought it was incendiary, etc. It's interesting. Yeah. Look, very interesting thing. Look, how about we start with this one, right? I saw this one of your top tweets on Twitter, like just over the past couple of days. You said the notion that the Gulf states guest worker programs are slavery is such contemptuous nonsense. They're for much higher wages in less pleasant but safer conditions, which workers do only for a few years before heading back home to raise a family. Look, it's funny because like I still think there are like big human rights problems with these programs. But I remember I did say something recently where I said, like, I wouldn't say it's fully slavery. And I remember I got like 1,000 quote tweets by leftists saying that I was racist and stuff like that. But yeah, you go into it. I'm interested in your thoughts on this.
Well, it's a repeated game. And there are and there's a very high turnover rate of people. People do not work their entire working lives there. You work there for a short period. You earn much higher wages than you would in India. And then you immigrate back and you raise a family back in India, or you remit it entirely to your family. If you if you look at like the remittance flows, right?
Yeah.
It comes out to multiple times GDP per capita in remittance flows alone, right?
Yeah.
So I just don't think that there's any like if this were a one-shot game where like there are workers who are tricked into coming to the Gulf states,
Yeah.
then perhaps you can make an argument. But it just isn't so. And I think the upshot of getting very angry about it is basically to hope to discourage that migration, which I think is actually like it improves things greatly. And also, there's just a fundamental belief that people are being tricked into it, and I think that is importantly nonsense.
I mean, that is an interesting point you raise. Again, and again, I'm saying like when I'm hosting Nicholas Decker, I'm I'm interested in the ideas. I'm not necessarily just endorsing everything. It's in the same vein like retweets and all endorsements. Again, ice don't prevent me from visiting the United States of America.
So what do you endorse?
What I was going to say is I do find it really interesting how you said it does have a lower mortality rate than back in India. You're probably right on that point. And I guess that's not something that people would probably talk about much or think about when it comes to that particular.
That saying was like something I did out of my own private curiosity, and does depend a bit on specification. But if you look at like at death rates in construction in India, and you compare it to death rates in construction for the Gulf states, it's considerably lower in the Gulf states.
Damn, I mean, I hadn't even thought of that.
Like
Yeah, I mean,
construction is a very dangerous job, especially in developing countries. So by the way, if you like read about, by the way, one of the bigger complaints is that you can't have a wife or a girlfriend while overseas, and that's one of the major complaints about the working conditions. Is that, which is, of course, not to belittle that, because raising a family is very important, and that's why people only do it for a short period of time. But I do think there is a strain of thinking that people are not able to maximize given constraints, and I think this strain of thinking is very bad. And those the particular facts about the remittance flows is just like a very quick debunking uh, on like labor exploitation being a macroeconomically important phenomenon. The remittances are simply too large for
so
workers to be systematically denied wages. It just does
wow,
not work otherwise.
I mean, yeah, it's literally higher than the US. That's pretty interesting. So to put things in scale, in Qatar, there were 700,000 Indians in 2017. That's a remittance per person of about 5,500 per person at a time when Indian GDP per capita. So I mean, is it actually about like double the wages then, or almost triple sometimes?
Yes. And note that remittances is savings. That does not include consumption
Yeah,
at home.
true.
So
One thing I was going to say, I mean, this is probably one of the things that people would raise, and this is one of the things that are the most problematic about it, right? The reports of people being systematically denied their own passports and being denied the ability to leave. I mean, that would probably be the thing that makes people talk about slavery, right?
yeah, I would strongly deny that it is systematic and that you just cannot square that with remittance flows. Like if they're
Right.
doing it to exploit people and pay considerably below their wages, and they're doing a very poor job of it.
Okay, interesting. And look, going even further, I remember seeing you arguing for like basically completely open borders. I mean, would you like to make your case for that? That's certainly not a view that I hold to, because I just think it's like something that would collapse most countries on earth, etc. But I'm interested. How do you make that argument?
So the argument is that the United States has both certain factor endowments and certain non-tradable economies of scale, right? Or agglomeration economies, right?
Yeah.
And so allowing people to move allows them to raise their wages and produce more. Um, and the wage gains from migration are not entirely accounted for by the human capital of the person migrating, right? Hendricks and Lutman have a 2018 paper where they pinned down 40% of wage gains being explained by human capital, but 60% being not being due to like the institution of the United States or being around people. Um, and of course, most people are thinking like of low skilled labor, right? And it's perfectly possible for it to raise wages for everyone if you allow for there to be non-substitutable workers. Um, and also, when I mentioned like based on trade based on a movable factor endowment, an example of that is like farmland, right? Which
Yeah.
is not movable. You need to import people. You cannot export the land, right? And have somebody else, work it outside of the country. But that's neither here nor there. When it comes to it also helps greatly in diffusing ideas. Um, there's a really excellent recent paper by Marta Prato, the Global Race for Talent, where basically like allowing people to migrate who are researchers not only raises the inventiveness of the people, directly, right? But it also raises the inventiveness of the people who didn't move, right? In their home country that they moved from, just from being exposed to more ideas. Um, and so I think that there are some reasonable arguments for restricting immigration. But those are arguments of like that eventually they'll vote for bad policies or whatnot. But there's no serious, to my mind, economic argument against open borders and complete factor mobility.
What about, okay, I mean, obviously there's two arguments here. One is that not everything can be measured in economic terms. So for example, there are sort of like certain intangibles, like for example, social cohesion, those sorts of factors that you must consider. The other thing
Social
being,
cohesion, the effects of social cohesion can be measured in economic variables. What cannot be captured is the externalities. Perhaps somebody doesn't like Indians or doesn't like Hispanics, and that's a valid aesthetic externality. I don't think
I
that
don't think
those
it's,
aesthetic externality are why. I
I
don't
don't
think
think
those
you can
aesthetic
say
externalities are all that large.
like I wouldn't say that it's just aesthetic. I mean, look, for example, what about when you have cases in Britain and Europe where, like, there have been pretty significant high profile cases of some pretty heinous crimes like committed by migrant gangs, like for example the Pakistani grooming gang scandal in Britain. And I know you might say, well, like it's not overrepresented or whatever, but I mean, surely that's not just necessarily like somebody saying like, oh, this is an aesthetic externality. I mean,
Oh, no, no,
it's
no. I
yeah,
think they do. I think they do. Perhaps I'm actually not sure with the stats here, right? So like in America, illegal immigrants and immigrants generally do not commit more crime. However, I
yeah.
think this goes away like after you remove African Americans from it, right? And you get to a more representative distribution of crime. But um, I'm not quite sure if that's the case in Britain. Even if they do, I'd expect that much the same crimes would be done in Pakistan, and I'm far happier that they are doing them in Britain, where there is a modern police force that would be more likely to arrest them. And I think the total amount of crime in the world would have gone down by allowing grooming
So hang
gangs
on.
to immigrate to Britain.
Sorry, okay, could you repeat that? So you're saying it's better that grooming gangs go to Britain because the British police force is a modern police force, and therefore there's overall in sort of like net utilitarian terms, there's less grooming gangs in the world or something. Is that your argument?
Yeah. Yes. Why?
Really?
What's wrong with that?
I mean, what about, for example, like the victims in Britain? I mean, like they were predominantly sort of like white girls in Britain, and there seems to have been racially motivated hatred that motivated a lot of these crimes, etc. Like, should those
Mhm.
victims not be, their interests not be held into account? Like you can't just say, well, you
But
guys have to have that suffering because, look, in overall terms, at least there's not going to be more Pakistani victims. I mean, like, it wouldn't the
so
British people be like, we shouldn't necessarily have that taken into our country?
so what is the trade-off then between white Britain rape rates and Pakistani rape rates? Like how many Pakistanis should be raped to avoid one white British person being raped?
I, I don't think that's like I don't think that's like a fair way to put it, Nicholas.
You
Like,
don't, do you not think that
no,
there's a
no.
trade-off? Is it 1 to 1, or is it maybe 2 to 1, or 3 to 1,
I mean,
four and a
I don't know.
half?
But it's not like the choice that's being presented to the British people. It's not okay. These people are going to either rape people in Pakistan or rape people in Britain. So if you don't let them come in and rape people in Britain, they're going to rape people in Pakistan. Like that's not like an actual valid sort of like argument, right?
Why is it not valid? Valid is a strong
I mean,
meaning.
okay, how about you go out to, like, I don't know, one of these British towns, like I don't know, one of these British towns that are quite poor, Blackburn or something like that, and just start door knocking and just be like, hey, listen, like we're going to have potentially a couple cases of migrant rape crime come up,
Mhm.
but you should be happy because it's not going to be migrant rape crime on the other side of the world. In net utilitarian terms overall, there's going to be less rape in the world. I mean, people are
Seems
not
like a
going
very
to.
good. It seems
Do you
very
really
a
think
very.
people would accept that, Nicholas? Like,
I think
that's
I would
being
accept
serious.
it. And by the
Really?
way, if your only interest is reducing crime, why don't you just deport criminals at home, right? You can just get rid of them. You can put them in another country, and your crime rate goes down because you've deported all of your criminals, right?
I mean, we've got a comment here. Kevin Nagar says it shouldn't fall upon the British to put their people at risk in order to prosecute Pakistani rape gangs overall. Like, surely that's a pretty decent argument, right? Like why does Britain bear that burden then? Because in your overall argument, you're presenting it as, well, you've got to take in some of these migrant rape gangs situations because it's going to lead to less Pakistani criminals in the overall world because Britain has a
Yes,
modern police state.
I am entirely unapologetically somebody who cares about total utility and not one country over another. But
But why does Britain then have that like burden in the world? Like Britain, because in your telling, the way you presented it is Britain has to accept some level of, Pakistani grooming gangs in their country because I don't know, like for some reason, like just they're a modern state, so they have to have that burden. But why? Why Britain
well,
potentially? Why should anyone have to accept that?
because
If
people
it's
move
if it's a
to
Pakistani,
Britain.
because what I was going to say, right, is if it's a problem inherent to Pakistani, if there's a problem in Pakistani culture that leads to some of these grooming gangs being formed, and there is a problem in this culture because there is widespread misogyny and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Why would it be the case that other countries in the world have to suffer that problem when it's an indigenous Pakistani problem?
Uh, I think that people should be allowed to move where they move, and I think the net result of that would be to reduce crime. I mean, that's all I have to say on it. I do have some questions for you on
Right,
on the
sure, yeah,
subject
ask me, yeah.
of criminal justice. Of why don't we just shoot the criminals?
I mean,
You
look,
want to reduce crime,
yeah.
right? And you
So, are
seem
you out
pretty.
of interest? Are you a supporter of the death penalty on that grounds?
I'm death penalty curious.
Okay. Well, I personally look. Australia, for example, is a country that does not have the death penalty. I wouldn't want to bring it back because there's always the horrible scenario where somebody can be convicted for something they did not do, and that is like the worst of the worst type of situation. That said, though,
What
like
what
I
what
do
error
think
rate? What error
what I was
rate
going to
would
say.
be acceptable for execution, and what error rate is acceptable to you for life imprisonment?
Look,
And how
I'm
are
not.
they going to be
Look,
substantially different from each other?
look, okay, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that in depth before. I'd have to think more deeply about
You
that. But
surely
what I was
must
going to
have an
say,
answer.
but what I was going to say, right, is I think when it comes to what I was going to say, right, is the way I look at this issue, I divide it between what is morally, I divide it between like moral desserts and I divide it from political reality on the ground. So if I was
Hmm.
being asked a philosophical question in terms of morality, do you think Osama bin Laden deserves the death penalty? Of course, I would say yes, morally desert for what he's done to the world. I think some people can commit crimes so heinous that they basically forfeit their moral right to life. That said,
Hmm.
though, I think the fallible nature of governments in the world means that I wouldn't accept, the political risk that innocents will be executed for that reason. So I kind of divide it between like in an ideal world where you could somehow ensure that you never ever execute somebody who is, innocent. Maybe in an ideal world, for some of the most heinous atrocities, I'd say yes, the death penalty is right. Like, for example, I look at Anders Breivik in Norway, where he killed like 80 plus people, and he's just like literally sitting in a pretty good prison cell playing PlayStation and stuff like that. Like, I just think like that guy does not morally deserve to live.
But you accept a rate of error for life imprisonment, or for imprisonment in general. What is your acceptable
There's a
number
comment
for
here.
life imprisonment, and
There's
why is it so different from the death penalty?
Well, there's a good comment here by Reese, and he says the death penalty is final, whereas life imprisonment can be
No,
reversed if
it
found wrong.
cannot be
There are people.
reversed. You cannot unlive the time that you spent in prison. You are killed but only halfway. If
Okay,
you
can I
spend
say
half
this
of your
right?
life in prison, it's like being killed for half your life, half death.
Look,
There's no
okay,
way to undo it.
okay. Say somebody is wrongly imprisoned for 15 years, and then they're eventually released.
Mhm.
Would surely that person? Obviously, that's a horrible disaster. Their wrongful imprisonment is horrible. They deserve massive compensation for the crimes for that crime done against them. And they'll probably in a country like America or Australia, like a country that has advanced sort of democratic system, like they're very likely to get restitution, etc. Obviously, no amount of monetary compensation could ever compensate you for the years you've lost. You're right on that. But what I was going to say is, like, surely that person would prefer the ability to eventually be exonerated after, say, 15 years of wrongful imprisonment than being straight up executed, because you can't come back from an execution. You're dead.
Sure, but in the meantime, the state can save on the cost of imprisonment.
Sorry, like, yeah, but
and so you need to weigh the weighted probability that they'll be exonerated against the cost saved to the state, and you do whichever one comes up favorable. In any case, I have a solution for you, right? Markets are an incredibly efficient way of aggregating information about the probability that something happens. In every case that you have somebody convicted, you create a market on whether or not that person will be exonerated, right? If the probability is sufficiently low, then you are safe executing them. Otherwise, there's a sufficiently high probability that they will eventually be exonerated, and you can keep the case going. And so I think that you can, in fact, do this for a substantial portion of cases. You have some percentage be randomly assigned to be decided by the market, and some of them be randomly decided by a judge. And of course, there's a market made in advance on every one of them, right? So of course, you will lose money on average if you bet for things that are inaccurate, right? And that keeps your beliefs accurate.
So, like, let me let me be clear here, right? You're arguing that, like, basically polymarket, the equivalent of polymarket should have, just randomly. It's like criminal law cases should just be randomly assigned to polymarket. And
yes. Well, but everyone is assigned to polymarket, and some of them are randomly assigned to a judge and juror, right? And if you get it wrong, like you predict the wrong way, because ultimately the point of a justice system, right, is to efficiently arbitrate disputes in a way that is consistent and predictable, right? And so if a justice system is consistent and predictable, it is perfectly modelable with a stock market.
Okay, how would you moderate for example? Oh, you there? Sorry. Oh.
I'm there.
Oh, yeah, okay. So there's a good comment by Reese. He goes, so if you have a minority group that is hated by the majority, the market will simply decide overall the person will be executed. How do you moderate for cases like that?
You don't. Because a lot of people in the minority will be perfectly willing to pay. And remember that if it does get assigned to a judge and jury, and the majority group has staked all of their earnings and they are wrong on it, then they simply lose all of their money. And meanwhile, if the majority group is so dead set in their prejudice that they are able to have the judge and juror convict whichever way they wanted, then it hardly matters that there was a market at all.
So, okay, here's a good question. You go back to the famous story in the New Testament where Pontius Pilate puts the choice to the crowd, whether he says, I
have a custom for you to release a prisoner on this day. Shall I release Barabbas or Jesus of Nazareth, better known as Christ? And the people all at once cried out, Barabbas, not him, Barabbas. Barabbas, however, was a murderer. And at that, Pontius Pilate was very much afraid, and he went back into Jesus, and he saw Jesus being brought out in the crown of thorns and in the purple cloth, and he said to them, "Behold, it's a man."
No.
Do you want me to recite that in German?
Yeah. Well, okay. Good on you.
Okay. Never mind.
Look, it's obviously a very famous passage in the New Testament. Okay, tell us how the poly market, sort of the betting averages, would have been applied to, say, like, Jesus versus Barabbas.
Well,
because that's a quintessential case, right? Where we look to it and we're like, the crowd, in Western culture and history, that's held up by, throughout the ages, for more than 2,000 years, basically been held up in Western culture. Like, here's the quintessential case where, like, the mob chooses the non-righteous choice. So tell us, like, how does the poly market apply to Barabbas versus Jesus?
Well, I think the outcome is pretty obvious. because as is well known, the Jews run the stock market, so they would undoubtedly win.
Dude, come on, man. That's pretty. Are you trying to get like cancelled? Like, are you doing this on purpose?
No, that is simply sarcasm. However, the 12 disciples, um, well, in the case of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
There's clear textual evidence, right? Simon Peter draws out his sword and strikes at Malchus, the high priest's servant, and Jesus at that says, "Put up your sword in your scabbard, for those who shall live by this sword shall die by the sword," etc. Right? And don't you know that if I willed it, a host of angels would come and take me away, right? And yet he did not will it. Therefore, we can gather that it was not God's will for him to be exonerated, and that it was in fact necessary, uh, and it has an
I mean, you're right.
unreplaceable
You're right
part
with Christian
in the
theology. Yeah.
economy of the redemption.
So look, okay, like I understand you're right that yeah, within Christian theology, like it had to have happened. I agree with
Yes,
that. So you're saying essentially the market would have done God's will in that case.
yes.
Okay, okay. I mean, okay. I mean, look at these are your words, not mine.
And remember also that Jesus said, "Whenever there are several of you, I am with you." A market is a congregation of many people. Therefore, a market is a manifestation of God's will.
Okay, okay. So you would basically argue like like the spirit of history resides in the bond market and all these things. I mean,
No, the Spirit of God.
yes, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, I like that. I got. Okay, tell us examples where you think the market can fail, because we both know that there can be market failures. And look, we had a comment here before. Someone pointed out. I think you said at one point you said minorities would accept that this would still be an overall fairer system. I don't know if people would actually accept that's an overall fairer system. Like, what's your argument for that?
Uh, it's a bit of a two-parter. Um,
Sorry. Okay, let's go with the second part first. So you were arguing before that.
Accepting it? Oh, right, right.
Yeah,
I'm arguing that it is, in
yes.
fact, in the interest of every participant to attempt to bet the truth, and that betting falsely causes you to lose quite a lot of money. Um, and uh, and
But
so
still,
for
there would
that reason, I
be,
would expect markets to be efficient here.
but there would still be countless innocents who would be like sort of murdered or killed unjustly until the markets like have that new equilibrium, adjusting for the account, like adjusting for. Because I guess by your account, right? Eventually, the markets would find a new equilibrium when, like, basically prejudice is priced in, where basically people understand
I think
that.
that it would simply cause prejudiced people to hemorrhage money precisely to the extent that they are prejudiced.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, so that's your argument. But prior to that equilibrium being established, there would be so many countless innocents who'd be killed. And I guess, like, according to your scheme, like that would just be like a price to be paid.
No, I wouldn't necessarily expect it either, because a lot of people can bet against, and if people note that if it's not, um, sorry, note that if like the bets come and it's like this person has a 70% chance of being guilty, right? And
Yeah.
say that's our threshold or whatnot, right? And so. Uh, they have it. And or let's say the threshold is 75%, the true probability is 70%. But suppose a bunch of people like try and bet against it. I'd expect them to be counterbalanced by people who know the true, like the underlying reality of the world. Uh, because we're all assuming, of course, that everyone is sharing a common prior. Um, and so there'd be quite a lot of people who would profit on average by betting against it. Um, so perhaps you can say that there's some amount of liquidity, sorry, there's maybe some plausible liquidity issues, but I don't think those are very plausible here.
Okay, like how do you account for the fact that there would be people, like at least at the initial stage of this kind of scheme, though, like there would be people who would be like unjustly put to death?
I deny it.
You think like straight up nobody would
No.
be so? But we both know that markets are not inherently universally rational. Like we both know there's very famous cases of market failure. You got like tulip mania. You got so many bubbles throughout history.
You should cite Harrison and Krebs here, right?
Look, I'm not an economist. I'm not an economics PhD, Nicholas. But I've read like a little bit of economics. I've read books on economics and stuff. I'm not an economics. I'm not going to be able to cite papers to you.
Actually, I actually have a little puzzle for you, Drew.
Okay, sure. Put the puzzle to me.
Suppose that everyone shares a common prior about the state of the world, or
Okay.
if we will say that the state of the world is common knowledge, so everyone knows that everyone knows, and so on ad infinitum. This is important, by the way, that it's ad infinitum. And suppose also that we are at equilibrium. So any trades that are taking place for hedging purposes have occurred, right? And everyone is perfectly hedged and whatnot. And assume further that everyone is slightly risk averse. Now, somebody receives information about the state of the world that is private information.
Yeah.
How many trades will occur?
Sorry, could you say that again? I got it. Sorry.
There is common knowledge of the state of the world. Everyone is risk averse. We are at equilibrium. How many trades?
Look, if there's full common knowledge and everyone's risk adverse,
and also somebody receives a private information about the world, right? So a farmer observes that his crops have been wrecked by hail, right? And he wishes to trade futures in the frozen concentrated orange juice market.
Okay.
Right? How many trades will occur, and what can we say about the world?
Well, look, you've just told me that the common knowledge is universal, right? So
yes,
assume so therefore this private information couldn't give anybody a specific leg up, right?
So you're saying that it couldn't give the person who received it a leg up?
So you've given me an example where somebody
we were at common knowledge.
Okay, we were at,
and then right, and then one person receives information.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
And they are attempting to trade on this.
Look, Nicholas, I couldn't give you an answer. I'm interested. What would you say? Because look, I haven't studied economics formally before. Like, I do find it an interesting puzzle. Tell me what you think it would be. Zero. Okay. So why is that? Could you explain that to the viewers?
Because making the offer reveals information. Because everyone started with a common prior, and everyone knows that everyone knows is risk averse, right? So the only reason to make a trade is if you have private information. And the willingness to make a trade fully reveals that information. So,
true.
So in other words, the mere existence of trades reveals that some people are trading on noise, and I think it's a very interesting thing. Now you can get around this with having essentially there being like some confusion over like what the actual state of the world is. And was it Freudenberg or the email game? I think that was Freudenberg.
What email game are you talking about?
It turns out that like having less than infinite common knowledge, right? In other words, the everyone knows that everyone knows that everyone knows that everyone knows, right? It turns out actually if you bound it, you can show that it's economically relevant. But I can't explain that right now. Anyway, you were saying.
Look, I wanted to. I did really want to ask you this while we were on the stream together. Could you tell us your reaction to the whole Aella gate, right? Because that was obviously that became a very famous tweet on Twitter. It went very viral. So essentially, what happened is okay. So you made an argument that monogamy should not exist. Could you let's start with that. Let's have you outline that argument for the viewers.
I'd say that there is very little distinction between my friends and my love interests. And so I think that could also be the case for many other people.
Hang on. Okay, so for you make no distinction between friends and love interests. But have you ever had the experience, for example, of being in love, Nicholas, and you love one person. When you have that experience, you feel a love that is naturally exclusionary of other people. Like, for example, I love my girlfriend, so I'm not interested in, going out with other people. I mean, are you like, it just literally doesn't interest me, going on dates with random people because, I have a partner who I love. I mean, how would you respond to that, right? I mean,
For reasons that I cannot explain, I have felt love.
okay,
And I
that's
have
cool.
also felt love for other people at the same time.
I mean, could that just be your own personal niche, though? I mean, like,
Certainly.
look.
But
Here's
I
the
think
thing,
that
right?
I think that our desires are often quite culturally constructed. And so we should argue for the desires that we want our culture to reflect.
Look, okay. What I was going to say, right? In my own personal life, I'm a bit more conservative. So in my own
Mhm.
personal life, I certainly favor, much more traditional models of, relationships and stuff like that. I'm on board with, monogamy and all these sorts of things. That's my personal
Mhm.
life, and that's, I was raised in a nuclear family. That's my
Mhm.
ideal for a family life and everything. Um,
I want
I
to have
I
about
have.
6 kids, I reckon.
Sorry, what'd you say?
I want to have about 6 kids.
Oh, that's good. Look, good on
Yeah.
you. Like, it's good to.
None of them, of course, genetically mine, but
Okay, look. Okay, we will get to that. I want to before that in itself is like an hour-long thought bubble, right? We'll get into that. Let's first keep to this point, right? So
yes.
I remember seeing an interesting argument on Twitter where basically somebody was responding to a trad and was basically saying don't get mad about people like Aella, because when you look at like studies of this, right, you see these studies, and there are studies that show that there are some people who are just naturally hyper promiscuous, right? Like, but it's
Mhm.
really those people. Those people are the ones who are coupling with each other, right? So like
Yes. She
when
refers to this as the slut cloud.
sorry, what'd you say?
She refers to this as the slut cloud.
Slut cloud. Okay. I haven't seen that. That does make sense to me because I think you are right. I think that is right in the sense that the people who want to live that life are naturally going to sort themselves into that category. Like, you're not going
Mhm.
to necessarily have these people corrupting the types of people who want to just have a normal monogamous life. And look, maybe this is a sort of
I think it
genetic
absolutely does
thing,
corrupt it, right?
personal thing. I
I
don't know.
don't think it's genetic at all. I think it's largely culturally mediated. It's the same thing with bisexuality and being transgender. It's largely a cultural thing. There's like a
Okay,
nucleus of people who feel very strongly that way,
okay.
and then their
Well, let me
desires
ask you
are
this, right?
mediated by the culture around them.
Okay, let me ask you this, right? So you think this is fully a cultural question. Therefore, what you want to do is you want to go
I
out and
think
try and
it's substantively a cultural question,
okay,
not fully. There are some people
okay,
who are very strongly inclined towards one lifestyle and another,
okay.
but
So
I would prefer to advocate for the world that I want to see.
okay, so in your ideal world, what would we see? There'd be no nuclear couplings, there'd be no nuclear families, you'd just have like widespread polyamory and stuff like that. Like, how would you
I
explain
think
your ideal world here?
my ideal would be for people to partner with the exact number of people that they want to, whatever that is.
Could this lead to social instability, do you think? Are there externalities here that you're not considering? Like, for example, there are studies that show that, like, I believe there actually are economic studies that basically say that in societies where there is, where men have more than one wives, it is often the men who get shut out in that system that then form a massive source of political instability. So,
Mhm.
like what would be your answer to that, for
I
example?
mean, to my knowledge, I was not advocating for polygamy. Um,
Not polygamy, but like if we were to have a world though where if we were to have a world where so
mhm,
in your world, people couple with the exact amount of people that they want to couple with,
mhm,
and say that then leads to an overall surplus of sort of undesirable men who just never get a coupling, right? Would
mhm.
that not create a massive source or major source of social political instability? Is that potentially why over 2,000-3,000 years we've had this strong norm towards monogamy built up within our culture? Because
No, I think we've had a strong norm towards monogamy because of the extraordinary danger of unprotected sex before modern antibiotics.
you think there's no
I cannot emphasize enough how serious syphilis was.
yeah,
Um,
no, absolutely, like very bad thing. Syphilis, of course.
mhm.
STDs, very bad.
I'm
What
glad that you're condemning. You know,
Yeah,
that you're
I
willing to
disavow. Yeah,
condemn syphilis.
yeah. I condemn Sisyphus. Sorry, I condemn STDs, etc. Of course, we disavow them. We disavow them, of course.
Yeah, okay.
What I was going to say though is, you think it was only though that norm was only built up because of the dangers of unprotected sex. It has nothing to do with the wider stability in the society. If that was the case, like, why is this a norm that we've seen built up across so many different human cultures, across so much time and space? You would have think that maybe there's some accumulated wisdom in the generations before us, and probably part of that was that previous generations recognized that there's going to be inherent stability if there's, say, just 20% of young blokes who just are never ever going to ever have a partner. We've seen studies that have shown that, in states where there is a
So
surplus.
wait, to be clear, you think that it's going to result in more young people not like more men not having partners than having partners?
It might well do, because there seems to be a distinct difference between males and females when it comes to sexual preferences.
Sure.
Like I think there is probably I think to some degree there's sort of like some biologically innate thing where men, the approach of men, maybe biologically, if you go all the way back to the hunt and savanna era, the approach of men was to spread their seed as far as possible. Whereas the approach of women biologically, again, we're going back to basically like caveman times, but biologically it was probably to tie down a man and have a stable partner for the raising of the child. So that I do think to some extent there's probably some biological explanation for why it does seem to be the case in broad terms that men are more promiscuous than women.
Yeah. Sure. I would also say that there is fundamentally a trade-off between men having partners and women having freedom, and that as you increase women having freedom, then they will decide not to partner with many men at the bottom of the desirability spectrum. I do not
And
really view this as a bad thing.
well, look, I think women should have the freedom to choose their own partners. I'm not
Certainly.
arguing for like an incel society, but what I'm saying is, if we were to have a society where people have amount of couplings that they desire, what I would fear would happen is sort of what Elon's doing now, where you have some people who are just extraordinarily rich and wealthy with, if there are no sort of cultural and moral mores to restrict them in any sense, would we not see?
I have no objection to what Elon Musk is doing.
Okay, but what I'm going to give an objection, right? Like I'm not just, the reason why I know that I'm not going to say to you, oh, it's icky, it gives me the ick, therefore it's bad. What I'm going to present to you is an actual argument. Like, if you have a society where the most powerful men, the ones who are so wealthy and rich, essentially do just have their own harems, that will lead to a situation where there will just basically be men who will never have families, because eventually there might just be the case where there are not enough people to go around for couplings to form. And would this not then be a source for, rise of inceldom and, terrible social instability and violence and stuff like that? Because we do see in societies where there is a preponderance of men over women, there's like a surplus male population. Like, one of the biggest predictors of a civil war is having a lot of young men who are either unemployed and also uncoupled.
All right, sure. Um,
So would this not lead to just massive war and violence?
Maybe possible. And if there are massive warlord gangs arising in Berkeley and Oakland, I will apologize for my misread on the long run social dynamics of non-monogamous partnering.
But
But I don't think that's very much likely.
Would you say the tail risk of that is potentially so catastrophic that maybe we shouldn't wholesale fully reorganize society based on this thought bubble you've had?
No.
So you think it's worth the risk?
Yes.
Even if the risk is like massive civil war in every country on earth, because
Yes.
there's no. Why is it worth the risk?
Because I think it's a pretty small risk.
Why do you make that argument? Because we do see over and over again, like, there are countries where there's a lot of young men who don't have partners and who are unemployed, and that is like the biggest rise. That's like the biggest risk factor, number one risk factor for like civil war and war.
I think that in expectation, my tweets will change the partnering decision of perhaps 17 people.
Okay, explain that.
That's just my guess.
Based on like, what do you make the estimate based off?
Vibes.
Okay, so out of the 650,000 people who've seen it, you think you've converted 17 people to a
No,
full
no.
life?
I think the full scale of my tweeting, if you include like personal conversations, I'd expect the number of people who change their partnering decisions to increase as
Okay.
a result of what I
So,
say.
so,
But
so this was the source of your interaction with Aella, and we'll get into that because I
yes.
think that was very interesting for a lot of people. So Aella is a big advocate of this idea, and she says, "I feel like your tweets are entirely Aella, but I don't think I've seen anyone else tweet." So essentially, you said you're searching for a wife. She said, "Aren't you young though?" You said, "It's just a number. I wish that were true. If you don't like my age, but marginally to." Hang on, where's good?
I
Good.
thought that was such a banger. Come
I mean,
on.
okay, yeah. Look, I doff my hat to you. I tip my hat to you, good sir, for your valiant.
You need to look in the replies to the replies to
Yeah, hang on.
find the famous one. So you'll note that Shaggy,
I'm
who's
gonna
in
find. Oh yeah,
Portland.
here it was. Was it this one? Yes. So
Okay.
would you
Yeah, there you
you
go.
read it out for the viewers? Read out the viewers.
Actually, a while ago, the girl chat did have a somewhat serious discussion on whether or not we should start awarding honorary orgies for good tweets inspired by you. We decided we were unsure about your ethical integrity, though. But there was an alternate universe where you had affairs with like 12 older women at once.
Good stuff. What was your Very goaded, Nicholas. What was your kind of thoughts there, and what was your immediate reaction when you read that comment?
I laughed and texted half my friends.
Yeah, yeah, no, fair enough, fair enough. So Richard Hanani came in and sort of batted for you. Said, "What makes you doubt Nick's ethical integrity?" The lying about what was that whole thing? I don't know what happened with the give up.
I changed my mind, and Basil explains it. Basil explains it.
Right. So you started a fund me because you lost your home. How much did you raise, and then what happened? You donated it all.
I I donated it all. Yes, I donated. It's like $4,500.
Wow. Okay. I mean, fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, respect to you for that. Respect for you. Actually, we should get into that because we haven't really discussed that yet. Tell us the saga of the Secret Service agents, how you lost your home, all this sort of stuff, because it's very interesting.
My landlord was displeased.
Oh, by the way, your video's cut out. Is there any way you can get it back on?
Yes. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
my landlord was displeased with me putting my address publicly. I am an
Can I ask you that?
undisclosed location, and actually, that's
Can I ask you that, Nicholas? So, I've dealt with a lot of death threats in my time. You might not know my backstory, but I was a long-term protest against the Chinese government and stuff like that. I had a lot
yeah.
of.
I'm aware of your backstory.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Well, look, I had a lot of death threats and everything. Never in a million years would it have ever crossed my mind to like literally just post the address and say like, "Come get me, guys." What
Well,
went through your mind with that?
my mom knew about it, and my mom was somewhat afraid. But my
Yeah.
landlord did not know. And because I believed that nothing would happen, I saw that the harm of putting my actual address out there as being of an expected value of no harm to anyone. My landlord, again, uh, was
Did you try to
displeased.
explain this to your landlord when
I
she?
did. She remained displeased.
Yes. What was the conversation? Tell us about that conversation. It's a very interesting conversation.
She had her boss on the phone call, and
Yep.
we discussed that she was terminating the lease, and I decided that it was largely acceptable. Um, and to be honest, I think it's actually a propitious development because I'm going to be traveling over the summer.
Okay, so you actually think in the end it was
It
you don't
allows me to save. It allows me to save on rent for 3 months.
okay, that's good. I mean, I'm glad that you had that opportunity. What are you doing now? Like, so you lost where you were living. I mean, what did you do?
Uh, I am at an undisclosed location, which I will not discuss further.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I mean,
Uh,
fair enough. No, that's good. I don't want you to get yourself in trouble, but just yeah, interesting. So, I mean, but do you regret any of that episode? And tell us about how you met with the Secret Service. What was that experience like?
I we just we had an amicable chat,
Okay,
touching
so the Secret Service.
on many points.
So the Secret Service literally came to your house. They wanted to talk about
Yes,
the fact that you had written an article essentially
they
saying
they
that in the future there was a
they
potential
they, they
template.
were they were curious if I had any guns or any current intention to harm the president or any other members of the administration? To which I answered, no.
Okay, so you said to them like you were basically just it was a thought bubble, or like you were just basically doing philosophy.
No, that I wasn't calling for violence at all. That I have
Okay,
never, in fact, called for violence against the present administration.
okay, yeah, because what was your argument? You were saying that if it gets worse, then it would be justified. That was your argument.
It could, there are circumstances in which violence is justified, and I think that it would be good for us to think clearly about what those circumstances are.
Do you think that framing it in those terms and the way you framed it was the right course of action? Because obviously you drew all these death threats to yourself, you got yourself in a lot of trouble, you had like probably tens of thousands of sort of MAGA people threatening to kill you. Do you think it would you have done anything differently?
No.
Nothing.
You know what's a good thing though, right? You know what makes it all worth it, right?
What?
Do you know who Adrian Auclair is?
No. Who's Adrian Ackler? Sorry.
He's an economist.
Okay, yeah.
And he follows me on Twitter. And
Yeah.
I think his papers are good. There are a
Yeah.
lot of cases like this where it's economists whose papers I think are good. And now they follow me on Twitter. I think this is a
Yeah.
good development. And
Even at the cost of your massive personal safety.
I don't think that my personal safety has been harmed at all.
You don't fear any so.
No.
Surely some of them some of these guys are pretty. Some of these guys can be
You skipped
unhinged.
over so many excellent tweets in the past.
What one should we focus on? But this was this is a pretty funny tweet. I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, but don't you think there's not a single person, not a single threat that made you second guess yourself?
No.
Okay, well, interesting. Not a single one. Why is that? What gives you such high resilience?
I don't get easily afraid.
Really? I mean, have you ever been subject to physical violence yourself? Ever, like in your life?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And so even despite having that past experience, you still don't get afraid. What do you think explains that? What in your psychology allows you to be like that?
I just don't. I don't know why it'd be so hard. It's just words on the internet. The only time that any other instances, I guess but they're mostly incidents of little importance. A drunk guy swatted at me outside a club, that sort of thing.
Okay. Should we go back now? I mean, wait, one last question about the Secret Service. Did you explain that you were like a student and you were kind of like doing a thought experiment? Like, did they understand that you're like what did they think of your sort of like intellectual work out of interest?
I didn't ask them much about their opinion of my work.
Yeah.
I think I did. Did I show Bayesian persuasion there? I think I did. But I'd have to know. Do you know what Bayesian persuasion is? I have a friend
Look,
who's
I've heard the
absolutely
term.
obsessed with it.
Look, I've heard the term. I'm not. I unfortunately haven't ever studied economics formally, but maybe you can give a bit of an overview for me and the
For
listeners.
sure. So suppose that everyone shares a common prior about the state of the world, right? And you have two agents, a sender and a receiver, and the sender wishes to induce some change in the receiver's action, but there is a constraint. They can only reveal true information, and they must reveal all that they know, right? Under this constraint, when and how can the sender induce a change in the receiver's actions that benefits them? And so the simple answer that Kamenika and Genskow find is that if the receiver's action is nonlinear, then it is possible for the sender to change the person's actions to their benefit, even while restricted to true information. And that you can show this graphically as concavifying a distribution of posteriors, right?
Yeah.
So let's give a concrete example, right? Imagine a judge. The judge wishes to convict the guilty and to acquit the innocent. I'll imagine also a prosecutor. The prosecutor wishes to convict everyone, regardless of their guilt or innocence, right? In this example, the prosecutor is a sender and the judge is a receiver. The judge and the prosecutor share a common prior that every defendant brought before the docket has a prior probability of being guilty of 0.3, right? Or 30%, right?
I do have to admit a bit, Nicholas, this is going a little bit over my head, but keep going. I'm interested.
Don't worry. I'm sure that your audience will understand it is and enjoying this immensely.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the judge will convict if and only if their posterior probability goes above 0.5. So if the prosecutor adduces some evidence, right, that shifts the judge's posterior above 0.5, then it is possible for the prosecutor to stop there, right? And they get the conviction, right? Despite them revealing only true information. And so the maximum number of people that the prosecutor can get convicted is 60%, despite everyone knowing that only 30% are guilty. We're assuming, of course, that a full investigation would just reveal the truth, and that intermediate steps reveal the truth but with noise. For example, you can administer a blood test, right? And imagine the blood at the crime scene was type A blood, right? And 42% of people in the world have type A blood. And if you plug that into Bayes' formula, that actually pops out just above 0.5. So somebody can test, the prosecutor can test for type A blood, and all of a sudden they're able to convict 42% of people, despite everyone knowing what is going on. And so the really cool thing about this is that you can think about there being a density function of posteriors, right? So like the likelihood the like the likelihood weights, right? And what you're essentially doing is you want to push some of them above 0.5 and push the other ones down to 0. And you can draw graphically the the gain and utility from drawing a line that makes the function concave rather than convex, right? And so that's by Kamenika and Genskow from 2011. A friend of mine, Daniel Luo, on Twitter, who you should consider following, people, is very interested in this sort of thing. And I don't understand what he's saying a quarter of the time, but it's better than it was a year ago when it was at least half the time.
Okay, interesting. Look, very, very intellectually interesting. I do have to admit, some of it, a large part of it, maybe a vast majority of it, did go over my head. But okay. I mean, certainly,
no. It went over my head the first time. The secret, of course, is that
I've never studied formal, but yeah. No, it's certainly interesting. Should we potentially go to this tweet? Because I think this is probably one of the most controversial ones. You were essentially arguing, Nicholas, for infanticide.
Yes.
Okay, how can you morally justify that?
I think infanticide is the traditionalist version of abortion, and that it's a better way to get in touch with our roots as a culture.
I mean, you're obviously joking there. But what is your sort of actual? I mean, okay, what's the argument? Why infanticide? Because I think the vast majority of people would see this and find it extremely immoral. So what's the argument here?
Sure. I think that things are bad because they hurt other people, right? And death does not hurt you because you cannot perceive being hurt. And if you cannot perceive, you cannot be hurt. Unless, Mr. Pavlou, you wish to argue that things that don't exist are harmed by virtue of them not existing.
Well, you have to consider, for example, the moral right of that child to grow to full age and all the life experience that it loses out on as a result of it.
No, I don't. Because you would also have to consider all of the unnumberable possible people that could have been born but never were. I regard them as equally morally worthy.
Why though? Because there's a difference between a mission, not having sex and then therefore not conceiving a child, and the actual act of taking a child's life that has been born. Like that child.
I strongly disagree.
But if you were to just give that child up for adoption, they would have the potential to live to a full and healthy, long adult life and have,
Certainly,
you know,
and
all
and
these
they
different.
would and they would have likely a positive like social surplus. But the thing is that a child that you could have had but didn't has the same expected social surplus. So I regard both of them as equally a deprivation of society, equally a deprivation from society of one child.
I still think though that there's a big moral difference there between, you know, you've okay, say for example, either one of us decided to be an incel and never once ever have a child, and therefore we just, you know, take vows of poverty.
Them, it's not that.
What is no? Okay, but like let's decide though that both of us take vows of chastity and therefore just decide never to have a child. That is a very different thing than literally positively going out and taking the life of a child and killing that child. Like that's
I strongly disagree. Both of them result in the same thing of no child in the world.
But the difference is though, the parent of the child that has already been born has the choice. They could just give it up for adoption, and that they won't have the child. The child will still live. So the option there.
So you're saying that it would not
by refraining from taking by refraining
the reason why killing
the child, they allow that child to live, right?
So the reason that
they have to go out
killing the infant is bad, according to you, is that it deprives the child of their entire life, right?
And there's also the moral wrong in killing a baby, and there's also a moral wrong.
No, there is not. There is no thing that is morally wrong or right in and of itself. And if you wish to make that claim, then you might as well just say that it is my intuition that every particular thing that I wish to believe is true, and I could have no counter argument against that. I think that you are a thinking and reasoning being, rather than that.
But Nicholas, like, what about the fact? Okay, let's take, for example, your argument that the child's life in and of itself is not worth it. It's not valuable. What about the sort of Kantian argument? You know, for example, Kant, when it comes to animals, where he basically says the reason why it's bad to kill an animal is that it actually brutalizes yourself, and it's more likely that you'll then go out and go. That was his reason for why torturing animals is.
I don't regard what she did as being particularly different in either its methods or in its brutalization of the self than what an abortion doctor does.
But I mean, literally, this child, if she had just given up for adoption, would still be alive right now. It's literally been born.
Sure. Then she should pay a fine equal to the expected social surplus of the child.
But let me say
30 years imprisonment.
So, okay, this is not my argument, but what somebody could argue is, oh, well, the child cannot survive without, like somebody could argue.
If you don't believe it, why are you arguing it?
No, I'm presenting it as like a steel man, right?
But so you know that it's something that you believe is wrong, so why are you arguing for it?
I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but like somebody, for example, like a common argument that is often brought up by people who are advocates of abortion is that, well, the child is, you know, in the womb of the mother, therefore it cannot survive without the mother, therefore it's the mother's choice, right? But at this stage, we're talking about post-birth. This child would live if it was taken by another family, if she gave it to a hospital for adoption, if she gave it to a church for adoption, orphanage, like that child would live, it would grow up to live and have a full adult life. And that she has to actually take the action of killing the child to prevent that. So why is that not immoral? How is it not immoral to take the actual active choice to take that child's life away once it's already been born?
Because, as I emphasized, nobody has been harmed.
The child has been harmed, though. Like that, you know,
the child would be equally harmed by any other cause that would cause it to not exist. The commission or omission, to me, there is no difference between commission or omission.
Why? What's your argument for that? Why
is it because both of them come to the same result. Now, I will justify to you why killing is bad above a certain age.
Above a certain age. What's the age that you think killing is bad?
I think about 1 to 1.5 would be reasonable.
Why?
Note that this is
Exactly?
only note that there are a couple things here that must qualify this. First off, um, if there are other people who have some interest in the child, then killing your own child. Well, okay, first off, obviously, it's not yours to kill if it's not your child, right? And if other people have an interest in that child,
Why do you why do you think a
then
parent
it's a harm to them.
parent has can I ask you, why do you think a parent has a moral right to kill a child?
Because I think that it raises utility. That's all.
How?
Now, no, to be
Surely there are
clear,
some things beyond the
to
utility,
be
like
clear,
the beauty of human life.
to be clear, if I were to come out against infanticide, I would be in favor of banning abortion, and I would also be in favor of banning like women from not having kids. To me, there is no one or the other.
Why?
Sorry, it is either
Why
one
do
or
you
the
want
other,
that route there?
because you're simply saying that the value of having children um, is high enough that we must, even if by force or by subsidy, cause other people to have children. To me, that they are exactly the same. Um,
Like, I don't understand why. So essentially, you're saying that if somebody were to reject infanticide, then they have to also
they have to
support.
reject abortion, and they also have to reject not having children.
Well, they, in your view, they would have to support breeding farms essentially.
They'd certainly have to support some measures to compel it. Yes,
But
whether
wouldn't
those are taxes and
I mean
subsidies.
compelled birth is literally rape though?
Not if it's like a tax and subsidy. We regard that as being categorically different for some reason. Um, because remember, like to impose a tax and then use that to subsidize having children is of the same moral character as forcing people to have children or forcing people to get married. Um, to me, they're all the same.
Listen, very fascinating conversation. I probably can't go on for it because I've already been streaming for 4 hours and I do have to leave soon. But I really would like to go.
Mhm.
Maybe later this week or even in a couple of weeks time we can do another one because like it is interesting. Obviously, you're
Sure.
challenging very
Do you want me
very
to? I would like to note why I think that murder is bad. It's
yeah. Okay. Firstly, I want you to say that,
because
and
it
then
induces fear in others. And because a child cannot fear, and because a fetus cannot fear, I cannot regard them being killed as bad any more than I would regard somebody not being born by the circumstance of never being conceived as being
can
bad
I
for
just
them.
can I make a counterpoint to that? If you're
Sure.
saying the only reason why it's bad to murder somebody is that it induces fear in others, wouldn't that then allow an exception whereby somebody who murders somebody but make sure that they're completely unconscious and like the chloroform, like wouldn't that have like this carved out for serial killers where like, well, as long as the person they killed
No,
was not scared.
because other people it's not that that person itself would fear, it's that other people would fear being in a society where that sort of thing can happen. When the killing is strictly delineated by age, and it's an age where nobody below that can fear, then I cannot come up with a sound moral reason why it should be wrong. And because I cannot come up with a sound moral reason, I have to regard it as licit, or at
Have
least
you
as
ever
licit as I would regard not having children altogether.
have you ever studied philosophy or just only economics?
I don't think that what philosophers do is largely useful.
But I mean, you're presenting a view of ethics. You're presenting a view of morality
Hmm.
that is very heavily utilitarian. Essentially, it's full blown utilitarianism, and like there are obviously a whole range of critiques of utilitarianism within like this within
Sure,
philosophy.
they're all
So
wrong.
why? Based on what?
Because they're generally just imposing axioms of like, I don't like this, so we're going to say that there are some things that are right in and of itself. I think that's silly. I actually think that everything can be derived from a bare minimum of conditions, which is I exist, and that there's also like you need to take an axiom, I think, that there is a is and not is, right? And then with those two, you can derive morality.
Okay, look, I could certainly contest you on that, but I do have to go because it is heading towards 4 hours. But maybe just as one last thing, I do want you to really quickly summarize your argument for why you want 6 children, but you want those children not to be genetically yours, which is obviously it's very counterintuitive to a lot of people. So could you explain that concept to people?
Sure. I wish my children to be as well off as possible. I wish to give them the best set of qualities. I am not the optimal set of genes, so I'll have somebody else do it. This is no different, by the way, than if I, marry a man, right? And we have a child with a surrogate, and it is my husband who provides the sperm. In that case, I am also having somebody else be the father of what can be properly thought of as my kids.
But don't you think that there's a certain special bond between children and parents where if you have the capacity to procreate, you would like to, have a child and you would like to have a child, that,
I think that I
that
would feel
from
much more
you and your.
comfortable with the average children of the love of my life than with the average children who will more likely represent my own family.
I mean, yeah, but you don't have any. I mean, it's obviously a very hardwired human instinct
Do you
towards.
have anyone in this world? Do you like your girlfriend more than you do any members of your family, or is the entire set of your family strictly preferable to your girlfriend?
Yeah, but here's the thing though, Nicholas. We're not just saying the whole idea between procreation between say a loving spouse and wife, a loving husband and wife is that it's a combination of you and the person you love. So it's when we're not just saying only one of the partners procreates. I mean, the whole act of having a child with the person you love is you're having the child with somebody who you love, and it will be in the image of them and yourself.
I think that it's perfectly plausible that, me and my husband and my wife have 6 kids together. And who knows which ones of us it'll be. Um,
Sorry, say that again. I'm not following you. What do you mean by that? So
I
hang on, I'm
I said that
confused.
my ideal world is me and
Yeah.
my husband and my wife.
So a sort of
Basic.
polyamorous coupling.
I mean, that's my ideal, certainly.
Okay.
But yeah, anyway, by the way, yeah, I do think it's worth noting, circling
Yeah.
back to polyamory, that it's actually surprisingly common. I think there might be considerable Twitter discourse when a certain economics professor who lives with his wife, his boyfriend, and his wife's boyfriend wins the John Bates Clark Medal in a couple years, because I'd say that he has about a 30 to 40% chance of winning it. And that'll be fun Twitter discourse. But
Look, I'm sure there are people out there that live these types of unconventional lives, but I guess the question why I'm asking is it's one thing for a minority to pursue this lifestyle based on their own preferences and stuff but it certainly seems that you're trying to say this should be the model for society as a whole. And why is that? Because I sort of what I was going to say is I certainly have a live and
I think that people should do what they want, and
yeah.
that they should
But you're,
consider.
but
Uh,
you're actively trying to change what people want, right? So what I was going to say is I certainly look my attitude towards non-conventional couplings and sexuality and stuff. I just have a live and let live attitude. I'm if you're not hurting other people, if it's
Certainly
all consensual.
reasonable. So you
Um,
you are free to advocate for whatever you want, and I am
but what
free to
I'm
advocate for whatever I want.
yeah, not sure. But what I'm saying is like I've got no problems with people if someone's not harming everyone, if they find the love of their life
But
in
you've made it
you know
clear that the tail risk of people engaging in this is harming other people. So you're contradicting yourself here. Either you're having a let
no,
in, let
what
live
I was
because
going
you don't
to
think
say
it's harmful, or you do think it's harmful. Which is it?
what I was going to say is I think it's non-harmful to society if it's just if it's just like a sort of minority of people doing this based on their own preferences. But where I think it could be harmful is if you were to say, okay, wholesale, we're reinventing the whole traditional concept of nuclear family. We're going to abolish the nuclear family and stuff like that. like, do you get what I mean? I'm saying, like, as I'm happy with, a minority of people, pursuing their interests without harming people. But I think it would be bad if it became like, if it came to the day where there's a super majority of people with your views, where you're like, no one should have biological children, everyone should have like a sort of like polyamorous coupling. I don't necessarily think that would be good.
I think there are many people who are the children of sperm donors, for example, right? Do you think that they should select sperm donors at random, or should they try and select for positive traits?
But here's the thing, though, like, it's a minority of people that are the children of sperm donors. And I'm fine with that. What I'm saying is, like, in a world where the entirety of children were sperm donors, like, that's the type of thing that, like, it's very, that's a brave new world. That's very that's something you have to really much more deeply, because the tail risk there.
Imagine, if you will, right, that there was like gene editing in the future, right?
Yeah.
And like you could edit your children to be not fat, right? Like,
Sure.
would you choose to do so?
Again, yeah, probably in the scenario you put to me, probably sure. Like,
Okay. And what if you made them smarter too?
Well, that's the difference, right? Like, that's where it becomes. I think probably if you polled the public, if you went to the public, I think a lot of people would be like, listen, the ability to make sure we have healthy children who don't have, the risk of severe illness and stuff like that, like, that's a great thing to be able to try screen and stop. But when it comes to positive eugenics, that's where it really freaks people out, because creating a sort of race of Ubermensch like that creates a whole, sort of political dynamic that can become very scary. Like, then how do we know that people might not start questioning the actual value of human life? They might say, well, this person doesn't have this person was not born with the right genes, therefore they're inherently inferior. I think that's where it becomes very dangerous.
No, they're not inherently inferior. People's qualities are revealed from their actual types, not anything else. I think that if you ever, uh, you know, there is a tail risk, certainly, that the people uh, might reject, the race of supermen, and try and kill them, right? The last time this
No,
happened, it was known as the Holocaust.
not even that. What if it's the Supermen deciding they're the ones who should have power and they're going to kill the inferiors? That's where, like, that's literally the sort of Nazi ideology, right? Like, that's where it becomes scary to me.
I think that it's a pretty well established result that income is rising in the size of the labor force. And so I think that any race of advanced supermen is perfectly capable of understanding our standard models of international trade and will make decisions accordingly.
So you think like they just wouldn't be fascist? There's no chance that they could ever be fascist.
I think that it's pretty clear that people's politics get better as they get smarter.
Is that true? Look at America. Like,
It's
America
absolutely
has,
true.
but America is by many measures the richest it's ever been. But there's a real risk of fascism coming to rise in America today.
Sure, and it's the dumb people voting for it.
It's still, yeah, but it's still existing.
Like,
I mean, it's still existing.
and educational polarization has become such that, like, the average IQ of Democrats has substantially gone past that of Republicans, and they were dragged down by the large contingents of ethnic voters in their coalition for a long time. So it's very strikingly now that the Democratic Party is the party of intelligent people, and the Republican Party is the party of dumb people. And I think it should be obvious, on which side my political sympathies fall.
Look, it was very interesting discussing, Nick. I do have to head off because I've been streaming for about 4 hours now.
Of course.
You certainly said some things that I like fiercely disagree with. It was good fun to have that debate. I mean,
yeah. And I hope you have a very Merry Christmas down there in Australia.
We have the Christmas at the exact same time as you, my friend. We're still many months away, December 25th. Thank you.
Why don't they have it like in winter too, right? So much of Christmas culture
Our
is based
Christmas
on
is
coldness, snow. Do you have snow in the winter?
In some parts of Australia, there actually does exist snow, like particularly in the sort of mountainous areas of Victoria and rural outback New South Wales. There is snow. It's a pretty small part of Australia.
Have you ever seen snow?
Yeah, no, I personally have seen snow, not in Australia. I was overseas when I went to like, I saw it in Ukraine. I've been overseas and everything. But yeah, no, we have, it is strange because all our Christmas iconography does have the winter snow stuff from the Northern Hemisphere, but we have it in the middle of, blazing summer in Australia.
Okay.
It's a strange thing. It is a strange thing. I've always, when I was a kid, I did think that was really strange. And look, I would love one day, I've said this with my girlfriend, I've said this with my family, everyone has a dream of having a white Christmas one day, like, being able to go over Christmas and experiencing snow during Christmas. I hope one day I can see that because I think it would be quite special. It's funny. We get raised on all the same sort of Christmas iconography and Christmas movies and all this stuff. Like we all watch Elf and we all watch the same movies that Americans watch for Christmas and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for us, it's in the middle of blazing summer. It's a strange phenomenon.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any other, I don't know, before we go, do you have any other interesting questions about Australia or anything?
No.
Okay, fair enough. Well, look, we should do it again soon. It was actually entertaining. I certainly raised some very thought-provoking questions. I have to go back and try and reevaluate arguing from my priors because you've raised some really.
You should talk more about economics though next time, and you should stick to the tweets. Like we can go through the reading list together, right? We can start with like we can start maybe for an introduction to your readers of like a simple too good Ricardian model, right, where you can like show how comparative advantage exists even when one country has absolute advantage, and then homogeneous firms but increasing returns as in Krugman, and then we can perhaps extend that. Actually, I think it'd probably be better. No, we'll do Mellets, right? So like heterogeneous firms, and then the Melton Ottaviano, heterogeneous firms with variable markups, and then we'll go back to the Neo-Ricardian. We'll do Dornbusch, Fisher, Samuelson, which is again two countries and a continuum of goods this time, and then Eaton and Kortumtos, and then two, which is generalizable to many countries, many goods, and you estimate with gravity equations. Then the equivalent result of Archilochus Costino and Rodriguez Clare. Then adding an increasing marginal market penetration cost a la Archilochus 2010, and then also showing how with non-homothetic preferences, the gains from trade can actually be reduced by variable markets rather than increased. And then we can turn to various empirical papers.
Sure, we can go through all that. Look, Nicholas, it's certainly a fun experience talking to you. It feels like I'm talking to a computer sometimes, but it is certainly interesting. And I thank you for joining the show. No, thank you. I enjoyed it, and I'll post, as well as the live stream, I'm going to post another thing up to my YouTube. You can share it to your followers too. But thank you, mate. It was good fun, and we'll do it again soon. Thank you, mate.
Good night.
Thank you, Nicholas. No worries. Thank you, man. Cool. Look, that was certainly a very interesting experience talking to Nicholas Decker. He has some very strange and zany out there ideas. I think probably the vast majority of people disagree with a lot of what he has to say. It's certainly interesting, at least from a sort of intellectual, philosophical position, to try argue with him. Again, I disavow a lot of what he says. Like, I don't want to get banned from visiting the United States as a tourist. I don't agree with what he says on Trump, for example, all this stuff. But look, it was an interesting conversation.